Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Angelica's Morbid Minutes. I'm Angelica, your insomnia queen, your chaos researcher, and tonight, your voice in the dark. The first thing you should know is this isn't a podcast about ghosts in the attic or things that go bump in the night. We don't chase shadows here, we chase the truth. If you're looking for a show that whispers spooky tales in the dark, you won't find that here. This is a show about what happens when real systems, massive, powerful, human-made systems, fail the people they were meant to protect. It's about the names we lose in the blur of breaking news and the stories buried under a press release. Every episode is grounded in evidence, not theory. Painstakingly sourced, fact-checked, and told with respect. The people you'll hear about were real. They lived full lives. They are not characters. They are not headlines. And what happened to them should never have happened. I was hesitant to release this as my first episode because it is still so new and more information is coming out every day. But the episode you're about to hear is accurate as of July 25th, 2025. All information comes from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, official airline reports, eyewitness accounts, survivor testimony, and verified international media. When the final report is released, I promise we will revisit this case with updated findings. We owe it to the families. But before we begin, I want to make one thing very clear. We have to talk about it, given the preliminary report, but this episode does not promote the theory of pilot suicide. That rumor has caused real pain to real families who are still grieving. There is no confirmed motive for what happened on June 12th, and speculation isn't storytelling. It isn't justice. It's harmful. So no, this isn't a story about a pilot's secret plan. It's a story about something much worse. It's about a warning no one acted on. It's about policies written in ink but ignored on the tarmac. It's about one decision, maybe even one mistake, that sent 242 people straight into the ground just 30 seconds after liftoff. And it's about the silence that followed. So take a deep breath. Keep the lights on if you need to. This is Mayday over Mumbai, the final flight of Air India 171. Let's get into it. It's June 12th, 2025, Ahmedabad, India. The heat had already settled into the pavement by noon. Inside the terminal at Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, travelers clutched passports, scanned boarding passes, and dragged rolling suitcases toward Gate 3. There was no sense of urgency, no clue that time was about to run out. Air India Flight 171 was scheduled to depart at 1:30 p.m. India Standard Time. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, registration VT-ANB, sat prepped at the gate. It had arrived the night before from London, undergone routine maintenance, and was cleared for departure. London Gatwick was the final destination. The cabin crew moved through final checks. Passengers filed in, some already stowing bags and taking selfies near the windows. The boarding pass printer hummed as agents processed a mix of British, Indian, and Portuguese nationals. 230 passengers, many returning to the UK after weddings, school breaks, or funerals. 10 crew members and the 2 pilots made up the rest of the manifest. By 1:36 p.m., the cockpit crew received taxi clearance. In the terminal, one Air India gate agent, who later asked not to be named, remembered an unusual delay during boarding. A passenger had left their passport behind at a kiosk and had to be paged. The delay pushed the doors to close 4 minutes behind schedule. 4 minutes. Long enough to be noticed, too short to stop anything. Out on the tarmac, the Dreamliner rolled slowly to the runway. The tower gave final clearance. 1:38 p.m., Flight 171 lined up at the threshold of runway 23. The cockpit voice recorder captured normal callouts, brakes released, thrust set. V1, rotate. The nose lifted, the plane was in the air. From the sidewalk outside BJ Medical College, a group of hostel students looked up as the jet roared overhead. Some of them waved, most didn't. At 1:39 p.m., just 32 seconds after liftoff, the aircraft pitched upward too steeply. A few seconds later, its engines choked. One student would later describe the sound as a deep cough followed by complete silence. Inside the aircraft, passengers barely had time to register that something was wrong. In the cockpit, alarms began to blare. The stall warning cut through the chaos. Then, a voice. "Why did you cut off?" Another voice, more frantic. "I didn't." And then, impact. The 787 slammed nose first into the boys' hostel at BJ Medical College, about 1 mile from the runway. The front of the aircraft disintegrated on contact. The wings sheared through the building. Fire erupted instantly. Jet fuel sprayed like shrapnel. Sections of the fuselage tore apart and tumbled across the courtyard. The entire crash took less than a minute. And in those seconds, 260 lives were lost, including 19 people on the ground. It would take hours to put out the fire, days to recover the dead, and weeks before investigators began to understand what had just happened. Because this wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a catastrophic, preventable failure. And behind it all, a flight number that should never have cleared that runway. Emergency services were overwhelmed before they even arrived. By the time the first fire truck reached the gates of BJ Medical College, columns of black smoke had already turned the sky a dirty gray. The hostel courtyard was buried under twisted metal and burning plastic. Students ran barefoot through the wreckage, bloodied and disoriented, some searching for roommates, others trying to pull victims from the debris. They didn't wait for the all clear. They didn't wait for anyone. One survivor from the hostel, a medical student named Sheree, told reporters he'd been in the stairwell when the ceiling came down. He heard what he thought was an explosion, and then saw the wheel of an aircraft hanging from the third-floor balcony. "I thought we were being bombed," he said. "It didn't make sense. Why was there a plane?" News of the crash traveled fast and unevenly. In London, families waiting at Gatwick were told the flight had never landed. Others saw the news breaks on TV, or worse, on social media, where unconfirmed photos and chaotic live streams of the wreckage flooded in. Rumors swirled. Some outlets reported there were no survivors. Others claimed more than a dozen had made it out. Air India took nearly 2 hours to confirm the crash. By the time they did, the world had already seen the flames. Officials scrambled to regain control of the narrative. The civil aviation minister appeared on national news by evening, pledging a full and immediate investigation. Air India grounded its remaining Dreamliners for checks. Boeing issued a statement expressing condolences and offering technical assistance. But behind closed doors, a different conversation was unfolding. The Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau had recovered both black boxes from the wreckage within hours, and the data inside them was damning. Both engines had failed mid-air, not due to bird strike, not due to sabotage, but because the fuel control switches, the mechanism that regulates fuel flow to each engine, had been manually set to cut off. That switch doesn't toggle on its own. It has to be moved by hand, and the only people with access to it were in the cockpit. This revelation sent shockwaves through the aviation world, because if the pilots had truly cut off their own engines, then this wasn't just an accident, it was something darker. And for the families left behind, that uncertainty was almost worse than the loss itself. Ahmedabad wasn't supposed to be a final destination. For most of the 241 people on board, it was just the start of a journey to London, to work, to see family, to get back to something called normal life. But normal didn't exist by 1:40 p.m. on June 12th. On the ground, rescue operations were in full motion. Fire crews from across the city had been rerouted. Police were tasked with controlling crowds, guarding evidence, and helping identify bodies. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found in that courtyard. It wasn't just an airplane crash. It was an incineration. Seats were fused to floors. Passengers were burned beyond recognition. The fuselage had folded in on itself like paper. At least 19 people on the ground had been killed instantly, many of them students in the hostel where the plane struck. Every minute counted, but every second felt too late. Back in the UK, vigils began popping up in Leicester, in Wembley, and in Derby. Photos of the victims appeared alongside candles and notes and flags. One small altar in a community center had a picture of a young boy with a handwritten sign. He wanted to be a pilot. And this was only the beginning. The full list of victims would take weeks to confirm. Bodies had to be identified through dental records, DNA, and passenger logs. Air India initially refused to release the full manifest. Many families didn't even know if their relatives had been on board. They just stopped answering calls. For every victim, a story, and for every story, a wound that hasn't healed. In the aftermath, the questions weren't quiet. They roared louder than the engines ever did. This wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't sabotage, it wasn't a lightning strike or a fluke mechanical failure. It was something worse. See, Air India, and more broadly, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, India's governing body for flight safety, had been warned. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. 9 separate safety notices had been issued to Air India between January and June of 2025. That's just in the 6 months leading up to this crash. And they weren't minor things. We're talking about fuel leaks, crew fatigue, maintenance oversights, issues that could ground an entire fleet if left unchecked. But the flights kept flying. One former Air India technician, speaking to the Indian Express under condition of anonymity, said it plainly. "We were told not to make noise. Just sign off and keep the schedule." He went on to describe a culture of silence, where safety reports were routinely buried and mechanics were reprimanded for delaying turnarounds. And it wasn't just internal. In May, just 1 month before Flight 171 went down, a whistleblower sent an email to the DGCA. In May, just 1 month before Flight 171 went down, a whistleblower sent an email to the DGCA alleging that maintenance records for several Boeing 787s were being falsified. That email was flagged, then reportedly ignored. When the crash happened, that same whistleblower forwarded their complaints to the press. It wasn't long before investigators were looking not just at the flight deck, but at the paperwork, at what wasn't done, at what was actively hidden. Let's be really clear here. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner is a next-generation aircraft. It's one of the most fuel-efficient, wide-body jets ever made, equipped with high-tech systems and extensive safeguards. And before June 12, 2025, not a single one had ever crashed. But records show this particular aircraft, tail number VTANB, had a known issue with its fuel system in April. And instead of grounding it, the fix was deferred. Deferred, in aviation terms, means we'll get to it later. But later came on June 12th, and it came with fire. The flight data recorder recovered from the site showed a sudden drop in engine thrust within seconds of takeoff, a dual engine failure, something almost unheard of in modern aviation, unless it's deliberate, or unless something went catastrophically wrong inside that cockpit. By the time investigators arrived, both fuel control switches were found in the cutoff position, a manual setting, one that kills engine fuel, one that no pilot would ever activate during takeoff. Which raises the question no one wants to answer. How does a $250 million jet go from smooth takeoff to complete engine failure in just 32 seconds? And how does no one catch it before 241 people die? The silence wasn't just in the cockpit. It started long before the wheels left the ground. When the wreckage cooled, there was almost nothing left. Rescue crews sifted through twisted metal and scorched concrete for hours. Some sections of the aircraft were so mangled that identifying the rows was impossible. The fuselage had disintegrated on impact, carving a crater through the courtyard of BJ Medical College and punching through the student hostel like a missile. And then, through the smoke, movement. A man was seen stumbling from the debris, dazed and burned. His shirt was singed to his back, his left hand blistered and bleeding, his eyes swollen almost shut from smoke exposure. His name was Vishwash Kumar Ramesh. He was 40 years old, a British national, and in that moment, the only living soul to emerge from a plane that had carried 242 people. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he just walked. Witnesses say he crossed the courtyard barefoot, pushing past shattered brick and flaming luggage, until a student flagged down an ambulance. When paramedics loaded him in, he could barely speak. The shock had frozen in his system. He spent the next 5 days in Ahmedabad Civil Hospital, recovering from chest trauma, burns, and smoke inhalation. But the physical injuries were the easy part. Ramesh's brother AJ had been seated across the row from him. They were flying back to London together after visiting family. They joked about how cramped the seats were. AJ had asked for an aisle. Vishwash had taken the window, seat 11A, near the emergency exit. That detail would end up saving his life. When the plane broke apart, the section of the fuselage where Ramesh was seated tore away from the rest of the jet and landed near the hostel's lower floor. The emergency exit door had buckled open on impact. A pass out, one he was barely conscious enough to recognize. In an interview with The Guardian, a doctor at the hospital said, "We've never seen someone walk away from something like this. His vitals were irregular, but he was lucid. He just kept asking, 'Where's my brother?' That answer never came." AJ's body would be recovered 2 days later, buried under what remained of the forward galley. In the weeks since, Biswas has avoided press appearances. His only public statement was delivered through a spokesperson. "I don't know why I survived. I only know that my brother didn't. And I will not stop until someone tells me why." His name has become both a miracle and a burden. Survivors carry that kind of weight differently. Some become activists, some disappear, and some, like Biswas, try to speak for the silence that followed. Because when the media moved on, when the headlines faded, the truth didn't go anywhere. And the bodies weren't the only things buried. The evidence, too, started slipping underground. Before we talk about what Air India didn't say, let's talk about what they did. On the afternoon of June 12, 2025, just hours after the crash, Air India released a statement that was brief, sanitized, and shockingly devoid of accountability. It read, "We are deeply saddened by the loss of lives in the tragic incident involving Flight AI-171. Our thoughts are with the families of the passengers, crew, and others affected by this tragedy. We are cooperating fully with the authorities in their investigation." It was the kind of corporate grief that sounds like it was written by a lawyer before the tears even dried. What didn't make the press release was the paper trail that had been growing for months. Warnings, violations, and fines. Between January and June of 2025, India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation issued no fewer than 9 safety violation notices to Air India. 9. That's not just a red flag, that's a parade. Among the violations, multiple aircraft dispatched with referred maintenance issues, logbook irregularities, inadequate crew rest scheduling, and the most damning failure of all, failure to implement required training for flight crews operating Boeing 787 aircraft. That last part, it hit hard. The Boeing 787 isn't just another plane. It's sophisticated, with an entirely different systems architecture than older aircraft. Pilots require extensive conversion training, especially around fuel management, automation, and engine restart protocols. So when investigators opened the flight deck logs and found 0 recorded simulator training for either pilot in the past 18 months, it raised alarms. Even worse, some of the oversight failures had been flagged internally by Air India employees. A leaked internal memo, later published by the Indian Express, included a quote from a maintenance officer dated April 2025. "We continue to dispatch aircraft with open MELs, minimum equipment lists, and incomplete checklists. Flight operations are prioritizing schedule over safety. This is unsustainable." That line was sent to senior management. No action was taken. And then came Air India 171. After the crash, a second internal report surfaced, this one from Air India's Safety Auditing Division. It listed 4 unresolved discrepancies related to the Dreamliner fleet's fuel valve inspections, issues that had been marked as non-critical. But here's the thing about aviation safety. Nothing is non-critical. Every switch, every sensor, every step is part of a tightly woven chain. One weak link, everything falls. The union representing Air India's cabin crew publicly called for a pause in operations just days after the crash. Their statement was blunt. Our members are shaken, our equipment is outdated. We've reported these issues for years. Now 241 lives are gone. As pressure mounted, the airline quietly retired the Air India 171 and Air India 172 flight numbers and grounded a portion of its 787 fleet for precautionary inspection. But the narrative they pushed in the media kept the focus on the investigation, as if it was a mystery, as if it hadn't been building. Because the truth was simple and ugly. The system failed long before that plane ever left the ground. If Air India had cracks in the system, India's aviation regulators handed them the hammer. At the top of the regulatory ladder is the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. They're the ones responsible for enforcing aviation safety rules across all Indian airlines, including flag carriers like Air India. Their job is clear: inspect, audit, and ground if necessary. But in the months leading up to the crash of Flight 171, they didn't ground anything. The first public sign of a systemic issue came in February 2025 when the DGCA released a routine inspection summary showing discrepancies across several airlines. Air India's Dreamliner fleet raised specific concerns, including fuel system irregularities, cabin crew shortages, and expired pilot certifications. But instead of escalating these findings, the DGCA issued a notice of compliance, essentially a stern warning and more paperwork. No fines, no mandatory groundings. According to a leaked email reviewed by The Hindu, one field officer had recommended temporarily suspending all 787 flights until retraining was complete. That recommendation never made it up the chain. The official who pushed for the grounding later resigned, quietly. In March 2025, a fuel valve sensor on another Air India 787 failed mid-flight. The crew diverted safely, but maintenance logs showed the aircraft had flagged the same sensor 3 times in the prior 2 weeks and was still cleared to fly. When asked why, a senior maintenance official reportedly replied, "We can't afford delays right now." At the time, Air India was still under the newly formed Tata Group management, trying to recover its reputation after decades of decline. On-time performance was being pushed hard. Flights were being dispatched with fewer checks, according to whistleblowers, just to keep the schedules intact. Then came the week of the crash. On June 9th, just 3 days before Air India 171 went down, the DGCA inspectors flagged 2 unrelated aircraft in Air India's fleet for violations, one for failure to document a recent engine inspection, another for deferring an avionics repair past the allowable period. Neither aircraft was grounded. And in a televised interview the day after the crash, India's Minister of Civil Aviation was asked point blank if the DGCA had done enough. His answer? "We trust our regulators. Let the investigation take its course." No apology, no ownership, no answers for the families watching. Let that sink in. The top aviation official in the country didn't even commit to overhauling the system. Just a wait and see. By that point, the public wasn't waiting. Protests had already started outside Air India's offices in Mumbai and Delhi. One mother held a sign with her daughter's boarding pass taped to it. The words underneath read, "She trusted you." And that's what makes the story so hard to swallow. Because it wasn't one catastrophic failure, it was hundreds of ignored warnings, hundreds of corners cut, all compounding until 1:39 p.m. on June 12th. By the time Flight 171 disintegrated over BJ Medical College, Boeing was already on the defensive. The 787 Dreamliner was their golden child, lightweight, fuel efficient, and marketed as the future of long-haul aviation. But insiders knew the Dreamliner's journey to the skies hadn't been smooth. It was delayed, redesigned, and riddled with early production flaws. One of the most controversial choices? Boeing outsourced much of the manufacturing. Critical systems, including flight controls, fuel components, and even portions of the fuselage, were produced by subcontractors across more than a dozen countries. It saved money. It cost control. In a now public 2024 whistleblower complaint, a former Boeing quality inspector alleged that multiple 787s were leaving the factory with improperly torqued fuel shutoff valves. These valves are part of the same system that investigators say were compromised on Flight 171. Boeing responded at the time with a blanket denial. "We are confident in the integrity of our aircraft and maintain the highest safety standards." But by mid-2025, internal memos were starting to surface. According to Reuters, one document warned of a potential misalignment issue in the cockpit-mounted fuel control switches that could lead to accidental toggling under vibration or during high workload scenarios. Translation: in some aircraft, under just the right conditions, the switch that shuts off engine fuel might be just loose enough to flick with a jolt or a bump. Sound familiar? Here's where it gets worse. That memo was dated April 28, 2025, just 6 weeks before the crash. Boeing didn't send out an emergency airworthiness directive. They didn't issue a fleet-wide recall or even a recommendation to check the mounting tension. What they did was quietly advise operators to review standard cockpit procedures for fuel switch handling. It was all buried in a non-urgent technical bulletin. And so, the plane flew. VT-ANB, a Dreamliner, fresh off maintenance and cleared by Air India's ops team, left the tarmac on June 12th with a potential failure point sitting in plain sight, inches from the pilot's hands. The Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau of India didn't miss it. Their preliminary report flagged Boeing's lack of action and recommended a full audit of Dreamliner cockpit switch configurations. A source close to the AAIB told The Independent that investigators were deeply troubled by Boeing's internal risk assessments and lack of transparency. But publicly, Boeing kept it vague. We are cooperating fully with Indian authorities. Our thoughts remain with the families affected by this tragedy. No admission, no plan, no follow-through. And it's not like this was Boeing's first brush with avoidable disaster. The world hadn't forgotten the two 737 MAX crashes that killed 346 people. Crashes linked directly to a faulty flight control system Boeing kept quiet about. People are asking, how many lessons does one company need? It wasn't just a plane crash. It was a ground-level massacre. When Air India Flight 171 came down on the campus of BJ Medical College, it didn't hit open ground. It slammed into a densely packed residential area full of doctors, students, staff, and families. The hostel it hit first was full. Many of the victims weren't passengers. They were people at home, in dorm rooms, sipping chai outside a tea stall, never imagining a Dreamliner would fall from the sky and crush everything. We often talk about crash sites like they're sterile, marked-off zones, burned fields, and blackened runways. But this was different. The wreckage sprawled over 2 city blocks. Concrete exploded, dorms collapsed, fires spread fast. The death toll on the ground alone reached 19. Another 67 were injured, some severely burned, others hit by flying debris, glass, or metal. Among the dead was Akash Patni. He was just 15 years old, helping at his family's roadside tea stall near the hostel gates when the jet hit. His mother tried to pull him to safety. She lived. He didn't. Not far from there, medical students who had just finished their lunch were buried beneath rubble. Some were found with their ID cards still pinned to their chests. This wasn't just an aviation disaster. It was a city-wide trauma. Ahmedabad, already known for its chaotic traffic and packed streets, suddenly looked like a war zone. Witnesses described bodies, charred vehicles, sirens, and ash so thick it hung in the air like fog. By the end of the day, more than 260 people were confirmed dead, making this the deadliest aviation incident in India since a mid-air collision in 1996. In the hours that followed, the city's hospital filled with victims, passengers, locals, and crew, some too badly burned to identify. Blood banks ran dry. Firefighters had to saw through the fuselage to reach the last pockets of fire. And yet, amid the horror, the questions started fast. Why did this plane crash less than 40 seconds after takeoff? Why were so many buildings hit? Why wasn't the runway cleared further back from dense housing? It wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was a failure of design, of oversight, of planning, one that killed the innocent on both sides of the cockpit glass. This is what people mean when they say, it could have been anyone. Because in Ahmedabad on June 12th, it was. By the time sunrise broke over London, the headlines had already landed. Air India 171 down, British nationals among the dead. Flight from Ahmedabad crashes after takeoff. At Heathrow and Gatwick, families waiting with balloons and signs were quietly escorted out of terminals by police. Some had already gotten the call. Others were still clutching arrival times on printed-out emails, scrolling the flight status screen again and again, hoping it was wrong. The grief spread like a wave, one name at a time. The ripple effect of this crash stretched from Gujarat to Gravesend to Gloucester. It tore across religions, professions, and generations. Every name that emerged added another heartbreak, another confirmation, and another funeral. And still, the official silence from Air India was deafening. No press conference, no list of the dead, no apology. Just a notice that the flight numbers, AI 171 and AI 172, had been retired. That was it. The UK government called it a tragedy. Air India called it an active investigation. Now remember, none of these people were famous. None of them were politicians or CEOs. But their absence has left entire rooms, whole neighborhoods, irreversibly quiet. At the House of Commons, the Prime Minister issued a brief statement of condolences. Flags were lowered to half-mast at multiple NHS trusts. A memorial board went up in Heathrow Terminal 4 with handwritten messages, dozens of names, and far too many blank spaces waiting to be filled. The thing about a disaster this big is that its center of gravity keeps shifting. It started at a student hostel in Ahmedabad, but its impact now has scattered across oceans, cities, and kitchen tables. And for the families still waiting on a cause, still trying to make sense of a crash that stole 241 lives and offered no explanation, that silence is more than painful. It's infuriating. By the time the sun dipped over Ahmedabad skyline on June 12th, the wreckage at BJ Medical College had begun to cool, but the heat of the questions were just starting to rise. The crash scene was cordoned off within hours. A perimeter of police tape and armed guards surrounded what was left of the Dreamliner. Investigators from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau arrived first. Behind them, airport officials, Air India staff, and the beginning of an international response. That's because this wasn't just India's problem. This was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, the global flagship of modern air travel, and this was its first fatal crash. Teams from the United States National Transportation Safety Board, UK Air Accidents Investigation Branch, and Boeing's own crash response unit all landed in India within 48 hours. Black box data was extracted, verified, and sent to labs in Delhi and Washington. The urgency was immediate. The press was relentless. And still, there were whispers. According to a report from The Independent, senior sources at the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, India's version of the FAA, had already begun circulating a dangerous possibility: that the crash was due to human error in the cockpit. Others pointed fingers at an aircraft malfunction, but neither side had evidence. What they did have was silence. From Air India, very little communication. From government officials, even less. Behind closed doors, though, pressure was building. Internal sources confirmed that 9 safety violations had been issued to Air India in the 6 months before the crash. But none of these had been made public. One notice, issued just 28 days before the disaster, called attention to a systemic lapse in crew training documentation. It didn't name Flight 171, but it didn't have to. That gap in the record was already wide enough to bury accountability. On June 14th, the Civil Aviation Minister, finally held a press conference. His statement was brief. Investigations are underway. Families will be informed as facts become available. But the facts weren't waiting. A student journalist from a local Ahmedabad college released drone footage showing the devastation. Burned textbooks, crushed steel beds, charred school uniforms. Medical supplies littered in the dirt. The plane had not just crashed. It had consumed a place meant to heal. In the footage, a red notebook was visible near the tail section. Its cover read, Pathology, 2nd year, semester 3. That student never made it to class. Local reporters began doing what government officials wouldn't, counting the dead. They identified medical students from Gujarat, children from the hostel, airport workers, and passengers who had only just checked in. So when officials said only 19 people had died on the ground, it wasn't just inaccurate, it was offensive. And in the absence of answers, the victims became numbers, until their families spoke up. The first theory to gain traction wasn't whispered in a briefing room. It was shouted by a grieving father in front of a news camera. My son was not a statistic, he said, holding up a framed photo. He was a student, a child. Someone failed him. We want names. His words didn't just go viral, they detonated. Because by then, most families were speaking out, echoing the same thing. This wasn't a tragedy in isolation. This was a system that had been buckling for months, and the signs had been there. Aviation journalist Rajiv Kumar told the Indian Express, this was not a black swan event. The DGCA had been on its back since at least January. That plane should never have lifted off that day. One violation stood out more than the rest. In May 2025, just 4 weeks before the crash, Air India received a Class 1 non-conformance notice. It flagged missing simulator records for crew assigned to international long-haul flights. While the names were redacted, it included a flight roster matching the one for Air India 171. Translation: the pilots flying that Dreamliner may have never been properly signed off on the latest mandatory training, and yet they flew. Why? Because delays cost money. Grounding a long-haul international aircraft for 1 day can cost a carrier upwards of $250,000 in lost revenue and rescheduling penalties. Air India was already behind on several audits. The incentive to get it in the air outweighed the paperwork. But here's where things turn from negligence to something darker. Multiple reports surfaced that flight attendants and lower-ranking pilots had raised concerns internally about rushed inspections and skipped briefings. Some even went as far as contacting DGCA whistleblower hotlines. Their complaints were logged, then seemingly vanished into the void. And despite the growing mountain of early red flags, top executives at Air India continued to issue statements denying any systemic failure. Their focus was on cooperating with the investigation and supporting the families. Behind closed doors, though, they were lawyering up. The public, however, wasn't buying it. On June 16th, 4 days after the crash, protests erupted outside Air India's headquarters. Survivors' families, student unions, and former crew members stood side by side holding placards that read, 241 lives, one carrier, no excuses. Not a tragedy, a failure. One woman, speaking through tears on live television, asked, "How many warnings did they need? How many bodies before they grounded that plane?" The answer, it seems, was 241. The protests didn't die down after a day. They grew. By June 18th, 4 separate vigils were held across London, Mumbai, and Ahmedabad. Candles were lit, names were read, and one by one, family members stepped forward, each carrying a photo, a story, a demand. This wasn't grief in isolation anymore. It had become a movement. At the center of it stood 171 voices, a newly formed coalition of victims' families, survivors, and legal advocates. Their mission was simple but unflinching: to hold every link in this chain of failure accountable, from Air India executives to regulatory agencies and even Boeing itself. Their website went live just 6 days after the crash. It wasn't flashy, no branding, just a stark black and white landing page with 3 words: "We remember, we demand." And beneath it, a growing list of names, each linked to a profile. Each profile ended with the same phrase: "This was not an accident. It was preventable." Behind the scenes, attorneys began filing early motions to preserve cockpit and maintenance data, and on June 20th, a class action lawsuit was announced, targeting Air India, its parent company, Tata Group, and potentially even aircraft manufacturer Boeing, depending on the results of the investigation. But it wasn't just about lawsuits. People wanted transparency. They wanted the tapes. They wanted the names of every official who signed off on that plane's release. And when they didn't get it, they went to the press. One former Air India technician speaking anonymously to The Guardian claimed the airline had a culture of punishing delay more than rewarding caution. He said, "There was this attitude: don't be the reason a plane sits on the ground." That was the unspoken rule. In the days that followed, news outlets began publishing exposés. One headline read, "Air India's safety culture was a tick-box exercise," says insiders. Meanwhile, public confidence was tanking. Ticket cancellations spiked. Multiple social media accounts shared footage of passengers demanding alternate flights. People were scared. And that fear wasn't just emotional, it was informed. By then, the preliminary report from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau had confirmed the unthinkable. The fuel control switches, critical to keeping both engines running, had been moved to the cutoff position. Both engines lost thrust, and just like that, the Dreamliner became a glider. And 32 seconds later, it was a fireball. No known mechanical defect could have caused those switches to toggle on their own, which left only 2 explanations. Either someone made a critical error, or someone made a choice. And the voices demanding answers were only getting louder. There were 242 souls on board Flight 171 when it left the tarmac at Ahmedabad on June 12, 2025. By the time the wreckage settled, only one of them was still breathing. The toll climbed higher still when rescue crews reached the neighborhood below. Families, students, strangers, caught in the path of something they didn't ask for. In total, at least 260 lives were lost. Before we end this episode, I want to say and honor the names we do know. They were not just numbers on a manifest. They mattered. We remember Ajay Kumar Ramesh, killed in the crash. He was seated across from his brother, Viswash Kumar Ramesh, the sole survivor. Akash Patni, age 15, the younger son of tuk-tuk driver Suresh Patni. He was at the family's tea stall near the student hostel when the plane came down. Hardik Avaya and Vithuti Patel, engaged. They had gone to India to celebrate with their family. Dear Buxy and Heer Buxy, sisters, both in their early 20s, returning to London after a surprise visit for their grandmother's birthday. Kayani Brahmbhatt and Gaurav Brahmbhatt, described as hardworking, loving, and spontaneous. Friends say they never announced visits, they just showed up with joy. Sanita Chakravarti, 34, crew member, passionate about aviation. Her aunt, also a former flight attendant, says Sanita inspired the next generation. Hamakshi Shantlal and Girish Lagli, from Wembley, northwest London, traveling with their children. Adeeb Girish and Tuxby Girish. Fionngwal Greenlaw Meek and Jamie Greenlaw Meek, married couple, spiritual wellness practitioners from London. Their Instagram story showed them laughing before boarding. Dr. Pratik Joshi, wife Komi Vyas, and their 3 children, Mariah Joshi, Nakul Joshi, and Pradut Joshi. Dr. Joshi was a consultant radiologist at Royal Derby Hospital. First Officer Clive Kunder, 32, co-pilot, over 3,400 hours of flight experience, based in Mumbai. He was the pilot flying that day. Morbid Adan Master, husband and father of an 11-month-old baby, member of the Can Hall Dean and Education Trust. Raksa Moda and grandson Rudra Moda, returning from India after the loss of Raksa's husband, traveling for a memorial service. Hana Nagar, former nursery school head teacher and Ofsted inspector. Her 4 grandchildren described her as the heart of the family. Rajintha Gopakuma Run Niger, nurse, had just resigned from her post in Portsmouth to move home and be with her children. Akil Nanababwa, Hana Forgery, and daughter Sarah Nanabawa, returning from a surprise trip to India, widely loved in their Gloucester community. Pramukh Nanda, wife Neha Nanda, and son Pravesh Nanda, on their way to attend their elder son's graduation in the UK. Salish Pamar, 61, and Nahal Pamar, 52, lost their son Heat in a 2022 plane crash, now reunited. Akash Patel and Sabanya Patel, returning home to their sons and grandchildren in Kent. Girda Patel, 23, top of his class in artificial intelligence at the University of Huddersfield, a promising cricketer and student. Manju Mahesh Patel, 79, had been volunteering at a temple in Ahmedabad, sat one row behind the sole survivor. Sahil Salim Ibrahim Patel, on his first international flight, just received a UK work visa, hoped to change his family's life. Matili Patel, 23, cabin crew, eldest of 3 siblings, first girl from her village to fly for a living. Arjun Patolia, 37, traveling to fulfill his wife Bharati's final wish, to scatter her ashes. Vijay Rupani, former Chief Minister of Gujarat State, member of the BJP. Captain Sumit Sarbawal, 56, veteran Air India pilot, line training captain, lived with his father, a retired aviation official. He was the pilot monitoring that day. Patan Shah, father of 2, owned a village store in Hampshire, visiting his sick father in India. Lapnoon Them Singh Son, cabin crew, sole provider for her mother and brother. Swapni Sunny, wife, Yoga Sunny, and sister-in-law, Alpa, headed to meet Alpa's husband after a 22-country road trip. A last-minute change put them on Flight 171. Javeed Saeed, Miriam Saeed, and their children, Zain Saeed and Amani Saeed, from West London, returning from a family holiday. Adam Taju, wife Hasina Taju, and son-in-law Altaf Hussain Patel from London. Their granddaughter Amara spoke of disbelief. No one expected this. No one was prepared. Manisha Sapa, 27, cabin crew, remembered by classmates as brilliant, ambitious, and kind. The memorial doesn't end here. Dozens of names are still being verified. Dozens of families are still waiting. Some victims were students, others were retirees. Some were first-time flyers, others crew veterans. But each of them, every single one, deserved to come home. This wasn't an act of God. This wasn't a mystery. This was a preventable tragedy with names, faces, and people who should still be here. And Air India's Flight 171 didn't just fall out of the sky. It was pushed by decisions, by silence, by failure stacked on failure, until there was no room left to climb. And now, 241 souls are gone. The youngest, a toddler. The oldest was nearing 80. They were students, nurses, engineers, parents and grandparents, families on vacation, couples returning home, crew members doing a job they loved. They boarded that plane trusting it would do what planes are supposed to do: take off, fly, and land safely. It didn't. And despite the headlines, despite the public outcry, despite the survivors' testimony, the investigation is still ongoing. The answers are not final, but some truths are already clear. The switches didn't move themselves. The warnings weren't hidden, and those left behind deserve better than silence. This story may be over for now, but the investigation into the crash of Air India 171 is still ongoing. The final report has not yet been released, and no official cause or assignment of blame has been concluded. When it is, we'll be back with an update. because the truth deserves to be complete. If this episode moved you, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you. I know how hard that was. These aren't just numbers or headlines. These are families, memories, and futures that were shattered in an instant. And if you're still here, I hope you're also angry, because we cannot fix what we refuse to face. Wherever you're listening to this, in your car, in bed, in the dark, I want you to remember something. These aren't ghost stories. They're system failures with body counts. We don't chase shadows here. We dig into what others try to bury. So let's face it, together. If you or someone you know was affected by Air India Flight 171's crash, resources and support groups are listed in the episode notes, including the Families Advocacy Network and International Trauma Support. We see you, we hear you, and we won't stop talking about this. I'm Angelica, and this has been the first episode of Angelica's Morbid Minutes. Next week, we leave the tarmac and go underground. Episode 2 is called Whispers from the Pit, the Tuam Babies. You'll want to be sitting down for this one. Until then, light a candle and don't ever look away.